Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome ICMI's Global Brand Director, Tara Gibb.
Hi, everybody. Hope you're enjoying your second day at ACE. On behalf of ICMI, I'd like to thank Avaya for their first-time platinum sponsorship of ACE. And welcome to the stage this morning, Vice President, Product Marketing for Contact Center Solutions, Jorge Blanco. Jorge has been working with Avaya for over 20 years, managing their contact center solution product marketing. And this morning he will be talking about gaining competitive edge through personalized customer experiences. So welcome, Jorge.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I first thank you for letting us indulge on your lunch, and please enjoy it. What we wanted to do was to spend about 45 minutes sharing with you probably the most relevant preoccupation that ourselves, my colleagues at Avaya, spend most of our time worrying about. And I've been around for about 21 years in this industry. I grew up with it. And if you remember 20 years ago, it was indeed a groundswell of consumer behavior, fundamental consumer behavior that created what, clearly a great evidence of the organization that you have here today. The same thing is happening now, but it is happening to an order of magnitude. And our proposal to each and every one of you is the fact that we've got to, especially yourselves as professionals in this industry, really have to take hold of the challenge. Not that you don't know it, but begin to lead the process of structuring your organizations for this business challenge, because I will tell you, at least from where we sit as suppliers, what we see is recognition, but really no plan yet to deal with what's happening in the industry. So we'll cover a few things, just some comments on trends. We will talk about what we mean by the personalization of the experience, clearly talking about how social media, of course, but social context is truly coming as the main driver of differentiation of these experiences, and then some suggestions in terms of how to look at this to transform it into a competitive asset for each and every one of your companies. The first thing that I don't think any one of us can argue is that there is absolute massive demographic change going on. And typically when people talk about demographic change, they love to pick on millennials, but it is not just a Gen X, Gen Y problem. This is a demographic change that is impacting companies at practically every segment, be it you're a digital immigrant, meaning you were born in before 1980, or you're a digital native that was born 1980 or post. And we all love to talk about our kids and how they interact, and we've seen lots of activity in the social networks on this topic, but this demographic change is massively impacting how companies want, or actually consumers want to do business with you. In addition to that, when we think about segments like millennials, what we find is that when it comes to the contact center, they are incredibly precise and binary about how they will assess the capabilities of a company to deliver services to them or not. And we have found that 73% of those millennials will actually abandon you as a provider if they have a choice after one bad interaction. One. And of course, as you would imagine, social networks play a critical role. 85% of that 73% will actually use a social network to tell the world what just occurred, why they gave you a hash fail. I think you've seen all of the examples out there from the airline examples that we've all seen. I just saw one 2 weeks ago about a young woman, 16 years old, in Germany that invited inadvertently 15,000 people to her Sweet 16 party. Had to be removed by German police. I'm not kidding, not making it up. I think we all saw the individual that tweeted first on the raid in Pakistan for bin Laden, who went from 500 followers on Twitter to 60,000 in 24 hours, because he was the first person on the scene. you will find that those particular critical elements would not surprise you, that if I clearly have a situation where I don't think you performed stellarly with my contact center interaction, that I will actually use a social network to give the grade, and not only give you the grade, but profess it to the rest of the world and my followers. With that, of course, as I told you, I've grown up in the industry, and what we have found is that interaction change is massive. This industry started based on the fact that consumers were given the right to transact with every one of you at your cost through something as simple as a toll-free number. Very simple technology, but contact centers or call centers didn't exist before it. We didn't need them. People didn't call. It cost me money to do it. Well, move to 2011, move to what we're dealing with, and what we now find is an environment where actually 60% of about 5,000 respondents that we, in a study that we've just published, told us that they will actually modify their mode of communication based on location. What does that really mean? Well, what it really means is that I wish I could tell you that there is a second channel other than voice that you can solve for that will take care of all your problems. The reality is there isn't a precise answer. All modes of communication are now relevant to actually service a customer. And you've got to decide how, not only do you make them available, but how do you actually orchestrate them. It gets even more interesting, if you see this mix, when you move on to generational preferences. You will find that not only do I need to account for all of these channels, I also need to account on who is going to be leveraging those particular channels and how do I adjust to actually be able to deliver differentiated service. It makes the challenge for us as suppliers to you incredibly sophisticated, but clearly this is much more of a business challenge for each and every one of you, and certainly we have put it at the center of what we focus on every day. The other element of this is, I will tell you, we don't sit here and go, this is new news to any one of you. You can pick up at the newspaper, a trade journal, anything, and you know the facts. You know the facts. We give you all of that. What we have not seen is, because of the connection to service delivery, really an augmentation of efforts to actually create solutions for this particular, not only challenge of today, but challenge of the next decade for sure. And there is phenomenal risks to dissatisfaction to a client if we do not begin to address the opportunity to deliver service, both sales and service across the value chain in a holistic manner. Now, when you look at it from that standpoint, one of the questions that we've begun to ask, because we recognize the challenges that many of you have, is how do you connect this to value? How do you actually have a conversation, if any of you are CFOs in the audience or close to one, how do you actually justify this investment? One of the things that we have begun to find is a lot of data that tells us that there's a huge dichotomy, just a phenomenal dichotomy, between the perception that you have about your level of service and the perception that your clients have about the level of service that you are delivering. And it is an order of magnitude. 80% of you think, hey, we're doing pretty well. Actually, 8% of your customers will actually agree with you. You've got an absolute, clear, and massive gap in how you think you're doing and how they think you're doing, which clearly is exacerbated by all the other changes that I've already begun to reference. But when you think about it from that standpoint, now think about willingness to pay and value. How do you make the argument? And what we have found is that service delivery and differentiation in service delivery is fast becoming one of the key areas that consumers are ascribing incremental value possibility to. As a matter of fact, 10 to 23%, according to a survey just published a few months ago by Siegel and Gale. How much does that mean? Well, depending on whichever industry you're in, that could be 4.5 to actually 6% incremental value that you could deliver if your service was indeed differentiated. In the United States alone, that's $27 billion. So it is a profit pool that is real, that is available, and that we see very few people taking advantage of. As I was just looking at this particular survey, I was reading the journal at the end of March, and I found that American Express actually published a survey that they did of their own consumers where they found 15% increase or actual willingness to pay for better service. The interesting part of this particular study was the fact that in 2010, that same survey said that consumers, the consumers that they actually went out and talked to, they were willing to pay about 5% more. In 2011, the number has climbed to 20%, 15 basis points in 12 months. So that is a massive, massive consumer outcry for people saying something as simple as, serve me better and I will reward you by even paying you a little bit more than I'm paying you today. I believe, to a certain extent, that it is a scorecard on the state of service as it sits today. Now, when you put together all of these challenges, the fact that there is willingness to pay, the fact that the entire consumer dynamic from an interaction perspective has changed, from the fact that we have network externality or the power network sitting behind how consumers are communicating, you put all that together in the context of those changes, and the biggest challenge that we find is the opportunity and the ability to enable you to put context together. The biggest point of dissatisfaction, especially for the demographic of 25 to about 35, is that they've shared information with you, they perhaps have shared information in a social network, and you're not connecting the dots. You are not putting together all of the context that is necessary to serve me. Now, when you think about it from that perspective, this is an industry that from a technology perspective and more clearly from an operational perspective has been looking to build that context for the past 20 years. However, you will find that 95% of every CTI implementation out there today, in 2011, does one thing. Screen pops. That's it. That's all it does. 20 years later, one application. It is very difficult now to begin to assemble context in real time to serve these clients, and clearly, hopefully you're getting a picture of the peril to service delivery if we do not begin to address it collectively. So our proposal to you is the fact that in assembly of that context, you will indeed be able to improve the experience, and as I was just mentioning with the willingness to pay, you will be able to increase the value that you're delivering through your sales and service delivery process. That is the anchor of our vision at Avaya, of our strategy, which is around the personalization of that experience. The fact that every consumer out there that you're serving carries with him or her a completely different set of contextual elements that need to be assembled for that particular moment in order to really be able to hit the mark on how you are indeed going to serve them. Now, when you consider the environment and the choices, we talked about location-based preferences, we've talked about the changes in modality. What you find, if you really take a high-level assessment of where everybody happens to be today, you will find that all of these areas remain disconnected. All of the points of entry, all of the modalities. A consumer needs to make a decision whether they're going to speak to you, whether they're going to chat with you, whether they're going to establish an SMS session with you, whether they're going to fax you if you still do that, whether they're going to email you. But at the end of the day, these remain islands for the most part. And the industry has attempted to connect some of these pieces with the technology that's there, but there's been handicaps and gaps that have not allowed for what we refer to as coordination and assignment of work across the board. The fact is that today, somebody giving you a hash fail on a tweet ought to be able to initiate a session with you at that moment. Not when you decide or your analytics engine decides that it passed the filter and it's important. At the moment, within seconds of the individual taking that action, happening in a web service environment. And you have to know perhaps where it started so you can best serve that individual, because they may be walking around with a smartphone or a tablet or both and want to expect to be served with that modality. So with that comes the second challenge. From coordination, you've got to begin to think about how you deliver that service consistently through the modality that this individual actually selected. How do you orchestrate a service that may start on the web, that may actually start on the mobile web, which is completely different than, of course, the fixed web with a full browser, that may actually start in a social web or a social environment, and connect it to the point where it actually transitions to perhaps a voice conversation, eventually a video conversation, a chat, etc. So that level of consistency in service orchestration is absolutely critical. The third layer, and it is the most important, and without it, none of us would be here, is how do you measure and react in this environment? I know many of you are asking, well, what's the use case and what's the ROI of incorporating social media in our environment? Well, we're not going to know. You're not going to know, and we're not going to know if we do not normalize how we treat all of these interactions and be able to analyze, report on the entire environment, to be able to optimize it, to be able to manage it. So that third layer, from coordination to consistency to performance, absolutely critical as you bring all of these elements together. That, in a nutshell, if accomplished, puts you on the path to personalization of experience. By the way, this is not about feel-good experience. This is not about, how great it was to deal with any one of you. It is about you being able to become programmatic about how you want to treat your customer, good and bad. There may be some segments out there you don't want to do business with. You want to make sure they come back, perhaps when they get a better credit report. You want to make sure they come back when, they're not as much a high-risk profile if you're in the insurance industry, for example. But at the end of the day is programming and structuring those experiences, but then being able to fluidly move them from any one of these points of entry. Now, we all know a typical experience in the contact center today. An individual presents themselves to any one of you, typically, calling directly to the contact center. They may interface with a self-service application. From that self-service application, we collect some information, we apply some compliance rules, we get them to an agent. We know that 25 to 50% of the time, however, that we actually move a call from a primary agent to a secondary agent, you lose information. In many cases, most of the information on the call. What have you created at that time? You've created a massive point of dissatisfaction, and you have compromised the performance data because you have no idea what happened. Yeah, I took a call and we failed, but I don't know why, because we lost it because I had to get somebody else involved. How many times do you have to repeat not only your account number in some cases, but explain to the agent 25 times what you just went through? It's not because anyone wants to do that to a client. It's because it's what we've got. It's what the limitations are. That needs to be solved. We need to think about a model where instead of pushing this information around, we need to be able to anchor it around that individual. No matter what type of media they actually select at that point in time to interface with you. Be it social, be it self-service in a voice environment or multimedia environment, be it in a traditional, I just made a phone call and I want to get going. All of those need to center and anchor directly on that end user. And you've got to think about how to serve it in a multimodal fashion, in a fashion that is actually transmedia, not just multimedia. It's not going to be good enough to be able to be in a chat conversation on your website and say, you know what, I really do think we need to have a live conversation. What do most people tell you today? Well, here's click to chat will get you to another agent that will speak to you. Rarely blended, rarely in the same modality. It's got to occur at that exact moment. I got to be able to go from a chat to a voice conversation and not lose the context. I also need to begin to think about holding that context together. And I would propose to you that you have to think about it in the full context of a collaboration session. You've got to be able to put that individual at the center of a collaborative session, hold it all together, normalize for their modality, create transmedia experiences so I can go from chat to voice or email to voice or social media to voice or social media to chat, and never leave the modality that they selected to interface with you at that particular point in time. When we think about it from that perspective, out comes the social networks, which we've been referencing. You think about how social networks operate today. There's lots of great tools that actually gather, analyze, and process information. Lots of tools out there. It's a booming market right now if you're looking for this type of interaction. But what is the challenge? The challenge is if I actually create a social event, like a tweet or a posting on Facebook, and I take it through this process, it is not integrated with the full-blown service delivery process. This is why now community leaders exist. You may have some community leaders, people dedicated to managing this environment. But people stop there. Our proposal to you is the fact that you need to think about it holistically as a part of the service delivery process. And when you think about it from that standpoint, you will find that when you gather the information on any particular type of event, about 10% of those particular interactions will actually be relevant, by the way. So you don't want to listen to everything. You're going to analyze and filter for relevancy. So you're going to find out this is something I care about that I want to deal with. You then come in and talk about how am I going to prioritize those items. And last but not least, get onto the actual integration of that event to the service delivery process. All of these need to occur in a flow, but without this last step of integrating fully onto what we refer to today as the contact center, but really the heart of the service delivery process, you're missing the opportunity to actually connect the dots for that client. You're missing the opportunity to increase the size of the transaction. You're missing the opportunity to actually create a moment of truth with that client with just satisfaction and loyalty. So that is the one element that I would propose to you. Don't forget, because if you stop at the processing, and I know what the problem is, doesn't mean that you've done actually anything about it yet. Now, from the perspective of, let me just move. From the perspective of bringing all of this together, what you have to consider is that if you are indeed being proactive about connecting the dots on the service delivery process, we propose to you, you will actually create competitive advantage. Differentiated competitive advantage. We do not live in a world where you can count on product-based or even service-based competitive advantage. It's hyper-competitive out there. I can tell you for a fact, every time I announce anything, my good friends at Cisco or Genesys say, oh, me too. I have it too. Here it is. I can show it to you. And we spend our entire life like an Abbott and Costello routine, right? Telling each other, no, you don't, here you don't, you know, who's on third and who's on first, and, you know, the entire critical routine of competitive differentiation. I would propose to you that it is through service delivery that you can actually get that accomplished. That you can become memorable and that consumers will become indeed loyal. Now, to the point of customer loyalty, I will tell you customer loyalty with a new demographic doesn't matter as much. We found in our recent survey, that we, like I said, we're publishing in the next couple of days. We have found that only 46% of our respondents think customer loyalty is important. But you know what? I believe 83%, if I get this number right, 83% of that population are still saying, if you're easy to do business with, I am going to actually become loyal. So there's a dichotomy of data of people saying, yeah, no, I know I can switch brands, but if you treat me well, I'm staying. If it's easy to conduct and transact business with you, I'll be with you. But then remember the original statistics I gave you. Only one bad interaction will take 2/3 of that group out of the equation. So, in summary, what I would want to remind you of is, as you consider what you're doing, and we recognize this is not a technology problem first. This is a structural problem. Think about exactly who actually you are serving, who you intend to serve in the segments that your companies actually target. But think about that transformation. And think about it comprehensively, because if you only focus on, you know what, today I'm going to make chat available to them in addition to voice, you may be missing the big picture. You may be missing the fact that they may want to interface with you mostly on social media and chat. American Express, in the same survey that I mentioned to you, actually made the argument, directly made the argument, that do not forget the live channel. Voice is still king. Or queen, whichever way you want to look at it. You abandon the live moment of truth, and you have compromised your service delivery process. In addition to that, we would ask you to accept the fact that you've got at your disposal, with your expertise, your experience, the opportunity to present your companies with the true bullet, silver bullet for differentiation and sustainable competitive differentiation going forward, and you do that through service delivery. When I say service delivery, by the way, I include both service and support, but also the sales process. Very, very critical. And last but not least, I would also propose to you that it is in the management of that experience that you're going to find that differentiation. It is hard work. I spent, about 2 months ago, I spent 2 days with 102 chief marketing officers. I don't know if there are any chief marketing officers in the room, but I will say they all think they own the experience. But then when you probe for how deep does that experience go, how much control do they have of that experience, how much control do they have of the processes that are going to tap onto that experience, it's very shallow. That's the opportunity you have as professionals in this industry, is to not only educate, but be able to provide the proof points, the measurable proof points of how this actually does indeed become a differentiator. All of us, from a supplier perspective, are most definitely focused on this problem. At Avaya, we are not preoccupied with anything else but this issue, because we do see it as a moment where you either recognize it, organize, and put your weight behind preparing for the new reality of the consumer, or you may be indeed left behind. But, you know, I would remind you, we're here to serve you. We're here to partner with you. And hopefully you will stop by our booth, ask any questions that you may have. I'll be around the booth. I'm not going to take questions here, but I'll be around the booth because dessert will be served there. Stop by the booth, ask any questions that you have. We are learning with you. We do not pretend to be the experts. Anybody claims to be the expert for this new space, they're blatantly lying to you. This is something we've got to solve together. So thank you very much. Again, sorry to interrupt your lunch, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.